I want you to imagine something for me. Imagine walking into a crowded bar on a Friday night. The music is loud. People are laughing, dancing, celebrating the end of another long week. You're surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, security cameras watching every corner, every entrance, every exit. You wave goodbye to your friends, maybe flash a smile, and then you simply cease to exist. No body, no trail, no answers. This isn't a magic trick. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Brian Shaffer, a 27-year-old medical student at The Ohio State University. A man with everything to live for, a man who walked into a bar in Columbus, Ohio on April 1st, 2006, and was never seen again. 18 years later, his disappearance remains one of the most baffling missing persons cases in American history. How does a grown man vanish from a building with limited exits while cameras record everything? How does someone with a promising future, a loving family, and a fiancé waiting for him just disappear? I've spent months going through every detail of this case, interviewing experts, studying the footage, reading the reports. And I need to tell you something that sends chills down my spine every time I think about it. The more I learned, the less any of it made sense. The answers I thought I'd find only led to more questions, darker possibilities, and a truth that might be more disturbing than any of us are prepared to accept. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that every missing person deserves to be remembered, if you believe that someone out there knows what happened to Brian Shaffer, then share this video. Hit that subscribe button, because stories like Brian's only stay alive when people like you refuse to let them fade into silence. Someone watching this might have the key that unlocks everything. That someone might be you. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Brian Randall Shaffer was born on February 21st, 1979, in Pickerington, Ohio, a suburb about 15 miles southeast of Columbus. From the moment he could walk, Brian carried himself with a certain lightness, a natural charisma that drew people to him. His father, Randy Shaffer, was a well-respected oral surgeon in the community. His mother, Renee, was the heart of their household, the kind of woman who made everyone feel welcome at her table. Brian had a younger brother, Derek, who looked up to him in the way only little brothers can, with a mixture of admiration and friendly rivalry. Growing up in the Shaffer household meant growing up with expectations, but not the suffocating kind. Randy and Renee believed in hard work, but they also believed in joy. They raised their sons to pursue their passions, to dream big, to understand that life was meant to be lived fully. Brian took that lesson to heart. As a child, Brian showed an early aptitude for science, but it was his musical talent that set him apart. He picked up the guitar in middle school, and by high school, he'd become genuinely skilled. Music wasn't just a hobby for Brian, it was an outlet, a way of processing the world around him. He'd sit on the back porch during Ohio summers, strumming chords, while the fireflies danced in the warm evening air. Those who knew him said there was something almost meditative about watching Brian play. He'd get lost in the music, transported somewhere else entirely. High school at Pickerington Central was a golden time for Brian. He was the kind of kid who moved effortlessly between social circles. He could talk to the athletes and the artists, the honor students and the rebels. He wasn't popular in the shallow sense of the word. He was genuinely liked because he genuinely liked people. Teachers remembered him as curious and engaged. Friends remembered him as loyal and funny, the guy who could turn a boring Tuesday into an adventure with nothing more than a tank of gas and a sense of spontaneity. After graduating high school in 1997, Brian enrolled at The Ohio State University to pursue his undergraduate degree. Columbus was only a short drive from home, but it represented a new chapter, a chance to become his own man while staying connected to the family he loved. He dove into his studies with the same enthusiasm he brought to everything else. He declared a major in biology, already feeling the pull toward medicine. There was something about the idea of healing people that resonated with him. Maybe it was watching his father help patients over the years. Maybe it was something deeper, an inherent need to make a difference. During his undergraduate years, Brian's personality continued to blossom. He joined clubs, made friends across campus, and became known in certain circles as the guy with the guitar who could play almost any request. He worked part-time jobs to earn spending money, never wanting to take his parents' support for granted. Professors noticed his dedication. Classmates noticed his warmth. He was the rare combination of intelligent and approachable, ambitious, but humble. It was also during this time that Brian began to seriously consider following in his father's footsteps. Not into oral surgery specifically, but into medicine. He saw how his father's work gave him purpose, how helping people provided meaning beyond paychecks and professional accolades. Brian wanted that. He wanted to matter. He wanted his life to count for something larger than himself. After completing his undergraduate degree, Brian took time to prepare for the medical college admission test. He studied with the same intensity he brought to his music, recognizing that this exam would determine the next phase of his life. When the results came back, they confirmed what those around him already knew. Brian Shaffer had the mind and the drive to become a doctor. He was accepted into the Ohio State University College of Medicine, beginning his journey toward becoming a physician. By 2006, he was in his second year of medical school, 27 years old, with a bright future stretching out before him, like an open road. His classmates admired his work ethic. His professors praised his diagnostic thinking. He was exactly the kind of young man you'd want treating your family members someday. Compassionate, thorough, present. But medicine wasn't the only thing that had captured Brian's heart. During his time at Ohio State, he had met a young woman named Alexis Wagoner, and their connection was immediate. Alexis was beautiful, intelligent, and shared Brian's love for life's simple pleasures. They became inseparable, the kind of couple that made their friends believe in love. By early 2006, Brian and Alexis were discussing marriage. She had received a promise ring, and their future together seemed written in the stars. Brian Shaffer had everything: a loving family, a devoted girlfriend, a calling in medicine, friends who cherished him, talent that lit up every room he entered. He was not a man with secrets. He was not a man running from anything. He was a man running toward life with open arms, which makes what happened next all the more impossible to understand. The year 2006 began with a shadow falling across the Shaffer family. Renee Shaffer, Brian's beloved mother, had been battling cancer, a fight that had consumed the family's emotional reserves for months. Brian had watched helplessly as the woman who had shaped him, who had taught him kindness and perseverance, grew weaker by the day. He tried to be strong for his father and brother, throwing himself into his medical studies with the secret hope that maybe, somehow, his education would help him understand what was happening to her, maybe even save her. But some battles cannot be won. Renee Shaffer passed away in the early months of 2006. For Brian, the loss was devastating. Here he was, training to become a healer, and he couldn't heal the person who mattered most. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. Friends noticed a change in Brian after his mother's death. He was still warm, still present, still the Brian they knew and loved. But there was something behind his eyes now, a depth of sadness that hadn't been there before. Grief has a way of fundamentally altering a person's chemistry, reshaping how they see the world and their place in it. Brian processed his mother's death the way he processed everything, through connection, through conversation, through music. He leaned on Alexis, who became his anchor during those dark months. He spent more time with his father and brother, recognizing how fragile and precious family bonds truly were. He talked about his mother openly, not avoiding the pain, but embracing it as a testament to how much she had meant to him. Those who knew Brian during this period describe a young man wrestling with profound questions about life and mortality. As a medical student, death was something he was learning to confront professionally. But losing his mother made it personal in ways textbooks could never capture. He began to think more seriously about what kind of legacy he wanted to leave. He became more intentional with his time, more present in his relationships, more aware that tomorrow was never guaranteed. By late March 2006, Brian seemed to be emerging from the heaviest fog of grief. He and Alexis were making plans for the future. They talked about the upcoming spring break, a trip to Miami that would give them both a chance to decompress. Alexis would fly down first, and Brian would join her after finishing up some obligations in Columbus. It was supposed to be a celebration of sorts, a chance to step away from the weight of loss and reconnect with the joy of being alive. The last day of March 2006 was a Friday, and it happened to be the last night before medical students scattered for spring break. For many of Brian's classmates, this meant one last night of relaxation before hitting the books again after vacation. Someone suggested going out to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a popular bar and restaurant located in the Arena District of Columbus, right above the Gordon Biersch Brewery. It was a known gathering spot for Ohio State students, a place where the drinks were cold and the atmosphere was energetic. Brian decided to go. It was an unremarkable decision at the time, the kind of choice a 27-year-old makes without a second thought. Meet up with friends, have a few drinks, blow off steam before vacation. Nothing about that evening felt different. Nothing felt ominous. There was no reason for anyone to pay special attention to Brian's movements, no reason to memorize his words or catalog his expressions. He was just a guy going out with friends on a Friday night. He arrived at the Ugly Tuna Saloona that evening with two friends, William Florence and Clint Florence. The bar was exactly what you'd expect on the last Friday before spring break. Crowded, loud, and filled with the unmistakable energy of young people eager to celebrate. Brian moved through the crowd with his natural ease, talking to friends, meeting new people, enjoying himself in the way he always did. Throughout the evening, witnesses would later recall seeing Brian in various parts of the bar. He talked to multiple people, some he knew, and some he was meeting for the first time. He didn't appear distressed or intoxicated, beyond the level you'd expect at a bar on a Friday night. He was just Brian being Brian, social and present and full of life. At some point during the evening, Brian reportedly spoke with his father, Randy, on the phone. The conversation was brief and loving. They talked about the upcoming trip to Florida, about life, about nothing in particular. Randy later described it as a completely normal conversation, the kind fathers and sons have all the time without realizing it might be the last one. If there was any hint of distress in Brian's voice, Randy didn't detect it. Why would he? His son was out having fun, about to go on vacation with his girlfriend. Everything was fine, or so it seemed. The night continued, the drinks flowed, the music played. Brian was spotted talking to what some witnesses described as two young women near the bar. This detail would later become significant in the investigation, as these women were never definitively identified. Were they relevant to what happened? Were they simply strangers making small talk? 18 years later, we still don't know. As the clock approached closing time, the Ugly Tuna Saloona began the familiar ritual of clearing out patrons. The evening was ending. Friends were making plans for the walk home or the ride to the next location. Brian was last seen on security camera footage at approximately 1:55 a.m. on April 1st, 2006. The footage shows him standing near the entrance of the bar, near an escalator that led down to the street level. He appears to turn around and walk back into the bar area. And then, nothing. That brief, grainy footage would become the last confirmed sighting of Brian Shaffer. What happened in the hours and minutes after that moment remains one of the greatest mysteries in modern true crime history. Did Brian leave through an unmonitored exit? Did he meet someone inside? Did something happen within those walls that no camera captured? Alexis was waiting for him in Florida. His father was expecting to hear about his trip. His classmates would return from spring break, assuming they'd see him in lecture halls again. None of them knew that Brian Shaffer had just vanished from the face of the earth. The first hours after Brian's disappearance unfolded the way these things usually do, with confusion rather than concern. When Brian didn't meet Alexis in Florida as planned, she assumed there had been a scheduling mix-up, maybe a delayed flight or a last-minute change of plans. Brian wasn't the type to be irresponsible, but spring break was spring break. Things happened. But when the days began to pass and there was still no word from Brian, the concern grew into genuine alarm. Alexis reached out to Brian's father, Randy. Randy reached out to Brian's friends. Friends reached out to classmates. No one had seen him. No one had heard from him. His apartment sat untouched. His car remained parked. His life stood frozen at the moment he walked back into the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The Columbus Police Department opened a missing persons investigation, and almost immediately, they encountered the central paradox that would define this case for nearly 2 decades. The Ugly Tuna Saloona was located on the second floor of a building in the Arena District, situated above the Gordon Biersch Brewery. The architecture of this building would become crucial to understanding the mystery. There were limited ways in and out. The main entrance led to an escalator that brought patrons up from street level to the bar. Security cameras monitored this entrance. Other potential exits included service entrances, back doors, and areas that were supposed to be staff only. Investigators pulled the security footage from the night of March 31st into April 1st, expecting to find a clear answer. Either Brian left the building and could be tracked to his next location, or something happened inside the bar that would explain his disappearance. What they found instead was impossible. The footage showed Brian entering the bar earlier in the evening. It showed him moving through the crowd, talking to people, being himself, and it showed him at 1:55 a.m. appearing to turn away from the exit and walk back into the bar's interior. But here's the thing that haunts investigators to this day. The cameras never showed Brian leaving. Not through the main entrance, not through any recorded exit, not at any point during the night or the early morning hours. Think about what that means. A 27-year-old man walks into a building captured by multiple security cameras. And despite those cameras recording throughout the night and into the morning, there is no footage of him leaving. He didn't walk out the front. He didn't get captured on any other angle. He simply stayed inside. Except he wasn't inside either, because when the bar closed and everyone left, Brian Shaffer was nowhere to be found. Police interviewed the bar staff extensively. They questioned the employees about whether Brian could have somehow remained hidden in the building after closing. They examined every potential hiding spot, every storage area, every nook and cranny where a person might conceivably stay out of sight. Nothing. They explored the possibility that Brian had left through a service entrance or back door that wasn't covered by cameras. This theory has persisted over the years, and it remains one of the most viable explanations. There were reportedly construction areas near the building at that time, and some investigators believe Brian might have exited through a door used by workers that wasn't being monitored. But even this explanation raises questions. Why would Brian choose to leave through a construction exit rather than the main entrance? Who was he with, if anyone? Where did he go next? The Columbus police brought in FBI assistance and expanded their search. They combed through every avenue of investigation they could think of. They looked into Brian's personal life, his finances, his relationships. They searched for any sign that he might have left voluntarily, that he might be alive somewhere, living under a new identity. What they found painted a picture of a young man who had no reason to disappear. Brian's bank accounts went untouched after April 1st, 2006. No withdrawals, no transactions, no activity. His credit cards were never used again. His phone stopped showing any activity. He had no known enemies, no legal troubles, no debts that would suggest he needed to run. His passport remained unused. Every digital trail a person leaves in modern life simply went cold the moment he walked back into that bar. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. If you were planning to disappear, to completely vanish from your life and start over somewhere new, could you really leave behind everything? Your family, your friends, your girlfriend, your future career as a doctor? Could you do it so completely that no one would ever find a trace of you again? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what you think, because this question sits at the heart of everything that follows. The investigation expanded to include Brian's relationships. His girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, was interviewed extensively. She cooperated fully with police, submitting to questioning and providing any information she could. There was no indication that their relationship was troubled or that anything had happened between them to suggest conflict. But it was another relationship that drew investigative attention, one that would add a layer of complexity to an already bewildering case. Brian's friend, Clint Florence, one of the two men he'd gone to the bar with that night, had a complicated history. Clint and Brian had been friends, but the nature of their relationship was scrutinized carefully by investigators. Clint reportedly invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination during questioning. This decision created immediate suspicion in the minds of many following the case. Why would an innocent person refuse to answer questions about their missing friend? To be clear, invoking the Fifth Amendment is a constitutional right, and it does not indicate guilt. Defense attorneys regularly advise clients to exercise this right even when they have nothing to hide, because the legal system can be unpredictable. But in the court of public opinion, Clint's silence spoke volumes to those desperate for answers. Investigators explored whether something had happened between Brian and Clint that night. Had there been an argument? A confrontation? Had something occurred in the bar that witnesses didn't see or didn't remember? No evidence ever emerged to support these theories, and Clint Florence was never charged with any crime. He remained a person of interest in the minds of many, but person of interest is not a legal status. It's a label given by the public to those who seem suspicious without any proof. The investigation sprawled in every direction, grasping at any thread that might lead somewhere. And at the center of it all remained that haunting footage, that grainy image of Brian Shaffer turning away from the exit, walking back into a crowded bar and never being seen again. As weeks turned into months and months threatened to turn into years, those who loved Brian Shaffer refused to let his case fade into the background. His father, Randy, became the face of the search effort. Despite carrying the fresh grief of losing his wife, Randy threw himself into finding his son with a determination that moved everyone who witnessed it. Randy worked with law enforcement, hired private investigators, and appeared in media interviews whenever the opportunity arose. He put up flyers, followed up on tips, and kept Brian's name in the public consciousness. For Randy, there was no other option. His son was out there somewhere, and giving up meant accepting a possibility too terrible to contemplate. The search efforts extended beyond traditional investigation. Psychics contacted the family with visions and theories. Volunteer groups organized searches of areas around Columbus. The FBI maintained the case file, updating it with new information as it came in. Tips arrived from across the country, people claiming to have seen Brian in various locations. Each lead pursued, and each lead ultimately going nowhere. The years accumulated like layers of dust, each one adding distance between April 1st, 2006 and the present moment. The Ugly Tuna Saloona closed and eventually became a different establishment. The building itself changed, obscuring some of the original layout that investigators had studied so carefully. Witnesses' memories faded, details becoming fuzzy around the edges. The case grew cold, though it never truly froze. During this period, investigators explored several theories about what might have happened to Brian. Each theory had its proponents and its problems, none providing the definitive answer the family desperately sought. The voluntary disappearance theory suggested that Brian, overwhelmed by the grief of losing his mother and perhaps facing other stressors, had chosen to walk away from his life. This theory pointed to his conversation with his father that night as potentially a goodbye and suggested that Brian had planned his exit carefully, leaving through an unmonitored exit and starting fresh somewhere else. But this theory always felt hollow to those who knew Brian. Why would a man who loved his family, who was devoted to his girlfriend, who was on the cusp of achieving his dream of becoming a doctor, suddenly abandon everything. The complete absence of any financial activity after that night argued against a planned departure. If Brian had intended to start over, he would have needed money. He would have left some trace. The accident theory proposed that Brian had somehow met with a fatal accident that night, perhaps falling or becoming trapped in a construction area near the bar. Investigators searched the construction zones near the building but found nothing. As the years passed and the city changed, the possibility of finding remains from an accident became increasingly unlikely. The foul play theory remained the most persistent and the most troubling. This theory suggested that someone, whether a stranger or an acquaintance, had harmed Brian either inside the bar or immediately after he left. The invocation of the Fifth Amendment by Clint Florence fueled speculation about what might have happened between the friends that night. Other theorists pointed to the unidentified women Brian had been seen talking to, wondering if they had played some role in his disappearance. In 2012, a new development captured the attention of those following the case. An individual came forward claiming to have information about Brian's remains being located beneath a building in the Arena District. The claim was specific enough to warrant investigation. Construction was actually halted so that the area could be searched. Nothing was found. The emotional toll on the family of these false leads cannot be overstated. Each time hope flickered, each time it seemed like answers might finally arrive, the subsequent disappointment cut deeper than the one before. Randy Shaffer continued to advocate for his son, continued to believe that someday the truth would emerge. The dynamics within Brian's social circle also shifted over the years. Relationships that had seemed solid fractured under the weight of suspicion and grief. Alexis Wagner eventually moved on with her life, as she had every right to do. Friends who had been present that night carried the burden of being among the last people to see Brian alive. Clint Florence's continued silence remained a source of frustration and speculation. Some understood his legal position and respected his right to protect himself. Others viewed his silence as an admission of involvement. The truth of his decision remained known only to him and his attorneys. Throughout all of this, Brian himself remained frozen in time. While the world moved forward, he stayed forever 27 years old, forever captured in those grainy camera frames, forever turning away from the exit and walking toward a fate no one could explain. The Columbus Police Department never officially closed the case. To their credit, they continued to pursue leads as they emerged, treating Brian's disappearance as an active investigation, even as the years stretched into decades. But active investigation without new information is like running on a treadmill. You're moving, but you're not going anywhere. By 2020, 14 years had passed since that night at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Brian's medical school classmates had become practicing physicians, the careers they'd trained for now well underway. They had families, established lives, and for many, the memory of their missing classmate had faded into the background noise of busy lives. But for Randy Shaffer, there was no fading. There was no moving on. There was only the relentless question that had defined his existence since that April morning when his son didn't come home. What happened to Brian Shaffer? True crime communities have a complicated relationship with unsolved cases. On one hand, the sustained attention keeps missing persons in the public eye. potentially generating tips that official investigations might miss. On the other hand, amateur speculation can spiral into harmful accusations against innocent people. The Brian Shaffer case became a frequent topic in online forums, podcasts, and documentary discussions. Every detail was dissected, every theory explored. Every person connected to Brian scrutinized by thousands of strangers on the internet. Clint Florence, despite never being charged with any crime, faced years of online suspicion. Threads speculating about his involvement proliferated across platforms. His decision to invoke the Fifth Amendment was interpreted in the worst possible light by those convinced he must know something. This is the dark side of true crime fascination, where the court of public opinion operates without rules of evidence or presumption of innocence. Other theories emerged that stretched beyond the facts into pure speculation. Some theorized that Brian had been the victim of an organized criminal operation, perhaps caught up in something happening in or around the bar that night. Others suggested that his medical knowledge made him a target for some nefarious purpose. These theories had no evidence supporting them, but they persisted anyway, filling the vacuum left by the absence of answers. The more exotic theories illustrated a fundamental human need to make sense of the senseless. When something as straightforward as a man going to a bar ends in complete mystery, our minds rebel against the randomness. We want patterns, explanations, someone to blame. We want the story to have a structure we can understand, even if the real story refuses to cooperate. Perhaps the most persistent alternative theory involved the building itself. The Ugly Tuna Saloona was situated in a complex that included multiple businesses, service areas, and potential dead spaces between walls or beneath floors. Some theorized that Brian, possibly intoxicated or disoriented, had accidentally found his way into a hidden space and become trapped. This theory gained traction because it would explain how he never appeared on exit cameras. He never left through any exit at all. Urban explorers and amateur investigators spent years trying to map the building's hidden spaces. They studied construction plans, interviewed former employees, and looked for any indication of where a person might become lost or trapped. But as the building changed ownership and underwent renovations, the original layout became increasingly difficult to reconstruct. In 2020, a documentary film about Brian's case premiered, bringing renewed attention to the mystery. The film featured interviews with family members, investigators, and experts, providing the most comprehensive public examination of the case to date. It asked difficult questions and offered no easy answers, much like the investigation itself. The documentary highlighted something that those following the case had long suspected. There were still people out there who knew more than they had said. Whether these people were witnesses who hadn't come forward, participants who feared legal consequences, or simply individuals who held pieces of the puzzle without realizing it, the documentary made clear that the full truth remained buried. For Randy Shaffer, the documentary was both a blessing and a curse. It brought his son's case back into the spotlight, potentially shaking loose new information. But it also meant reliving the worst chapter of his life in public, watching strangers debate theories about what happened to his boy. Randy had aged considerably since 2006. The years of searching, hoping, and being disappointed had taken their toll. But his determination never wavered. In every interview, he emphasized the same message: Someone knows what happened. Someone is carrying this secret, and Randy believed that someday that someone would come forward. The documentary also explored the psychological profile that investigators had developed about Brian. Those who knew him described a man who was universally liked, who avoided conflict, and who faced his problems head-on rather than running from them. This profile made voluntary disappearance seem deeply unlikely. Brian was not the type to abandon his responsibilities or the people who loved him. But the documentary also acknowledged the impact of grief. Brian had lost his mother just months before his disappearance. Even the strongest people can be fundamentally altered by loss. Could Brian have been struggling more than he let on? Could the pressure of medical school, combined with the weight of mourning, have pushed him towards some breaking point? Those who loved Brian rejected this interpretation. They pointed to his conversations in the days before his disappearance, his excitement about the trip to Florida, his plans for the future. This was not a man planning to end his life or walk away from it. This was a man looking forward. But the human heart is a complicated instrument. People can smile while breaking. They can make plans while already knowing they won't keep them. The exterior we show the world is not always an accurate reflection of what's happening inside. As the documentary reached its conclusion, it left viewers with more questions than answers. The mystery of Brian Shaffer remained unsolved, his fate unknown, his family still waiting for the phone call that would finally end their nightmare. There is a particular kind of suffering reserved for the families of the missing. It's not the sharp, clean grief of a funeral, a definitive ending that allows the healing to begin. It's something more insidious, a wound that never closes, an absence that fills every room. Randy Shaffer has lived with this weight for 18 years. Every holiday, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday, the absence of his son is present. The not knowing is its own form of torture, more cruel in some ways than the worst confirmed truth could be. In interviews, Randy has spoken about the range of emotions he experiences. There are days when hope persists, when he truly believes Brian is out there somewhere and will eventually come home. There are other days when the more likely truth presses down on him, when he acknowledges that his son is probably gone and has been for years. And there are days when the anger emerges, or directed at whoever is responsible for taking Brian away, or at the universe itself for allowing such a thing to happen. The family dynamics surrounding missing persons cases are often strained. When someone vanishes, those left behind can find themselves pulled in different directions. Some want to preserve hope indefinitely. Others feel the need to accept probable reality and move forward. These different coping mechanisms can create conflict even among people who love each other deeply. Derek Shaffer, Brian's younger brother, has largely stayed out of the public spotlight surrounding the case. His relationship with his brother, his processing of the loss, his ongoing life, these have remained private. This privacy is entirely appropriate. Not everyone processes grief publicly, and Derek has every right to navigate his pain in whatever way works for him. Alexis Wagoner, Brian's girlfriend at the time of his disappearance, has also moved on with her life. She cooperated fully with the investigation, answered every question asked of her, and eventually had to accept that she might never know what happened to the man she loved. Her eventual marriage to someone else was met with understanding by most, though some true crime observers criticized her unfairly. People are entitled to find happiness even after tragedy. Alexis's moving forward doesn't diminish her love for Brian or her grief at his loss. The friends who were with Brian that night have carried their own burdens. The last people to see someone alive, even in circumstances where no wrongdoing occurred, often struggle with survivors' guilt and endless self-questioning. What if they'd stayed longer? What if they'd noticed something? What if they'd insisted Brian leave when they did? These what-ifs are corrosive. They serve no purpose except to torment those who ask them. But the human mind asks them anyway, unable to resist the impulse to find some action that might have changed the outcome. The broader community of Columbus, especially the Ohio State University Medical School community, was also affected by Brian's disappearance. A young man on the cusp of joining their profession had vanished without explanation. It was a reminder of life's fundamental unpredictability, of the way tragedy can strike anyone at any time. Some of Brian's medical school classmates went on to dedicate portions of their careers to forensic medicine or advocacy for missing persons. His disappearance, while devastating, inspired others to engage more deeply with these issues. It's a strange kind of legacy born from tragedy, but it represents a way that Brian's absence has continued to matter. The toll on law enforcement should not be overlooked either. The detectives who worked Brian's case invested countless hours pursuing leads, analyzing evidence, and interviewing witnesses. They experienced the frustration of a case that refused to be solved, a puzzle that seemed to mock their best efforts. Some of those detectives have retired. Others have moved on to different assignments. But the Shaffer case likely stays with them, an itch that can never be scratched. For the true crime community that has followed this case for nearly 2 decades, Brian Shaffer has become something more than an individual. He's become a symbol, a representation of every unsolved disappearance, every family left waiting, every question that refuses to be answered. His story is told and retold, not just because it's mysterious, but because it reminds us of how much we take for granted. We assume we'll see our loved ones again. We assume tomorrow will come. We assume the world makes sense. Brian Shaffer's disappearance challenges all of those assumptions. Randy Shaffer turned 80 years old, still not knowing what happened to his son. Let that sink in for a moment. A man who has lived 8 decades on this earth, who has experienced the full spectrum of human joy and sorrow, still goes to bed each night without answers about his child. In recent years, Randy has continued to speak publicly about Brian's case, though less frequently than before. His health, like that of any octogenarian, has become a consideration. The relentless pace of advocacy that he maintained in the early years has by necessity slowed, but his hope has never disappeared entirely. He still believes that someone will come forward. He still believes the truth will emerge. There have been developments, though none that provided the breakthrough the family sought. In 2021, the case was featured on several high-profile podcasts, introducing Brian's story to a new generation of listeners. Tips continued to trickle in, each one investigated, each one ultimately leading nowhere. The Columbus Police Department has maintained that the case remains open and active. They have emphasized their willingness to pursue any credible information that comes to light. Modern investigative techniques, including advances in DNA analysis and digital forensics, offer possibilities that didn't exist in 2006. Should new evidence emerge, the tools to analyze it have improved significantly. Some have advocated for a renewed search of the building where the Ugly Tuna Saloona was once located, utilizing ground-penetrating radar and other technologies to search for hidden spaces or remains. The current building owners and city officials have been approached about such efforts, though logistical and legal complications have prevented comprehensive new searches. The passage of time has changed the evidentiary landscape in ways both helpful and harmful. On one hand, people who might have feared speaking up in 2006 might feel differently now. Relationships change, loyalties shift. Secrets become harder to keep as life circumstances evolve. Someone who remains silent out of fear or misplaced loyalty might find the courage to speak after nearly 2 decades. On the other hand, time degrades evidence. Memories become less reliable. Potential witnesses pass away. Physical evidence deteriorates or is destroyed through renovation and reconstruction. The window for finding answers while still open closes a little more with each passing year. Despite all of this, there remains reason for hope. Cold cases are solved every day. Advances in genetic genealogy have cracked mysteries that were thought forever unsolvable. Deathbed confessions, conscience-stricken witnesses, and unexpected discoveries continue to bring resolution to families who had given up hope. Brian Shaffer could still come home, at least in the sense of his fate finally being known. His family could still receive the closure that has eluded them for so long. The question is not whether such resolution is possible, but whether it will happen while those who love him most are still alive to receive it. For Randy, the mission has taken on an additional urgency. He is not a young man anymore. The years remaining to him, however many they might be, are finite. He wants to know what happened to his son before his own journey ends. He wants to be able to visit a grave, to say a proper goodbye, to understand why his boy never came home. This is not an unreasonable request. It is, in fact, the most human request imaginable, and somewhere out there, someone holds the key to granting it. To whoever knows what happened to Brian Shaffer, Randy is waiting. He has been waiting for 18 years. The weight of your secret, whatever it is, cannot possibly be heavier than the weight of his not knowing. There is still time to come forward. There is still time to do the right thing. I started this story by asking you to imagine walking into a crowded bar and simply ceasing to exist. Now, as we reach the end, I want to return to that image with new eyes. Brian Shaffer was not a ghost. He was not a mystery waiting to be solved. He was a son, a brother, a boyfriend, a friend. He was a medical student who dreamed of healing people. He was a guitarist who found peace in music. He was a young man who had recently lost his mother and was learning to carry that grief forward. The facts of his disappearance remain as puzzling today as they were in 2006. He walked into the Ugly Tuna Saloona on the last night of March. He was captured on security cameras throughout the evening. He was last seen appearing to turn back into the bar. He was never recorded leaving. He was never seen again. 18 years of investigation have produced theories but no conclusions. Voluntary disappearance, accident, foul play. Each possibility has been explored, and none has been proven. The cameras that should have recorded his departure captured nothing. The witnesses who should have seen him leave remembered nothing. The trail that should have led somewhere led nowhere. But here's what I believe. After all the research, all the analysis, all the time spent with this case, someone knows. Maybe they were there that night and saw something they didn't understand at the time. Maybe they've heard whispers over the years that they dismissed as rumor. Maybe they carry a direct knowledge of what happened, a burden they've shouldered in silence for almost 2 decades. To that person, I want to say something directly. It's not too late. Whatever fear has kept you silent, whatever loyalty has sealed your lips, whatever justification you've told yourself for staying quiet, it's not stronger than the truth. Randy Shaffer is in his 80s. His time to receive answers is running out. The gift of resolution, of finally knowing, is something only you can give him. The Brian Shaffer case teaches us something important about the fragility of existence. In one moment, a life can be present, full and vibrant. In the next, it can vanish completely, leaving nothing but questions and grief. We like to believe the world is orderly, that effects follow causes, that mysteries have solutions. But sometimes the world refuses to cooperate with our expectations. This does not mean we stop seeking answers. It means we understand that the seeking itself has value, even if the finding proves impossible. For those who have followed this case, who have shared articles and discussed theories and kept Brian's name alive in the public consciousness, thank you. Your attention matters. Your engagement keeps hope alive. Every new person who learns about Brian is a potential source of the breakthrough his family needs. And for Brian himself, wherever he may be, whatever happened on that April night 18 years ago, I hope there is peace. I hope that the circumstances of your disappearance, whatever they were, did not involve suffering. I hope that somewhere beyond our understanding, you know how much you were loved and how fiercely your father has fought to find you. The story of Brian Shaffer doesn't have an ending yet. It remains suspended, unfinished, waiting for someone to write its final chapter. And that chapter could come tomorrow or next year or decades from now. But as long as there are people who remember, as long as there are investigators willing to pursue new leads, as long as there is a father who refuses to give up hope, the possibility of resolution remains. And in that possibility, there is something that looks very much like hope. If this story moved you, if you want to help keep Brian Shaffer's case in the public eye, share this video. Subscribe to this channel. Talk about Brian with people who might have information. The solution to this mystery may not come from forensic analysis or detective work. It may come from someone somewhere, finally deciding that the truth matters more than their silence. Brian Shaffer deserves to come home. His family deserves to know what happened. And all of us deserve to live in a world where people don't simply vanish without explanation. The cameras captured Brian walking back into that bar on April 1st, 2006. Somewhere, somehow, the truth about what happened next is waiting to be found. Let's find it together.